Hey everyone, it has been some time since I put myself in front of this camera to talk about COVID-19. Here I am back today, July 16th, 15th? I don't even know. It's so hard to keep track of the day and the date when it's, COVID times and nothing matters anymore, right? Just kidding. Things matter. So, all right. So for some of you, you guys had requested some things for me to talk about. So I'm going to talk about those things. I've got at the end of this article that I'm holding in front of me, I have some notes to make sure I go through some of those things. And then as I get into this article, really the thing that prompted me to want to get in front of people was actually reading this article. And it really felt like I was rereading so many of the things that I was talking about early on. Written by someone who has better credentials than myself. And, myself a chiropractor. Chiropractic immunology is kind of what I think of our practice as. So it's my world, and I spend time in it. And I look at how do we naturally maximize immune system function. And that's what I've done for 20 plus years. So anyways, this stuff isn't new to me because I spend my time in it. So we're talking about this because this is such a critical area of discussion, and right now it's almost the area of discussion. So at the end we'll talk about good news for Claire, and we'll talk about vitamins for Corey and Verity, and we'll talk about some things. But first we're going to talk about immunity for Brian. So all right, if you guys hadn't seen this article that I had posted, and I only had like 10 likes on that post because it came after I posted, and I was posting graphs, right, of cases and deaths and doing that and analyzing and crunching data. And so then I posted this, and not a lot of people saw it, so I thought, you know what, I should actually talk about it. So this article written by Beta Stadler, I don't know how to pronounce this guy's name. He's a German guy, so it's like, I don't know. He's former director of the Institute for Immunology at the University of Bern, which, just to give you a sense what that means then, is this guy was the director of an educational platform, which typically would suggest then that it is more of on the liberal side. It's just generally how that works, but maybe not. For University of Bern, he's a biologist, professor emeritus. So, basically he described here as an important medical figure in Switzerland. We look at what he's gonna say. I'm gonna dig into this, and I had someone say, I want peer-reviewed journal literature, citations. And I'm so sick of it. Sorry. I'm not saying I'm sick of it as in, we don't look at peer-reviewed journal citations as being valuable. No, I do. But if that's what's guiding us right now, then we shouldn't be doing anything that we're doing right now. Because if we go from everything that's been, a citation, a peer-reviewed journal study, published study, February and back, there's no basis for what we're doing. So if we look at everything from, March forward, we're going to have all sorts of crazy stuff that it's like, yeah, we're just rushing to the altar with our study because we think it has relevance or we want to be relevant. And that's sadly the problem I find with so much stuff. It takes more time in a rearview mirror to actually validate a lot of what comes out, especially when it comes out post-haste. It's just kind of getting tossed out there. And it's allowing people to forget about the decades of science that have built us to the place that we should be right now. And that's my point. So basically everything he says, is there peer-reviewed journal studies for it? Absolutely. I'm just not going to run down a bunch of citations, but feel free to jump in and do that work. I think you should. So this is just the stuff that's been accepted for a long time, taught in in universities around the world. So in the stuff that I learned in the immunology world came out of textbooks that are medical textbooks. So people think, oh, chiropractors, Life University, you guys are crazy. No, we learn the same stuff. We just have a different spin on it. We believe there's potential to impact some of these things in other ways than drugs. That's it. And I think if I asked all of you, just right now, you're watching the video, all of you, anybody out there who has a goal or an aspiration to be on more pharmaceuticals, please, I couldn't even say it. It sounds so crazy. Please raise your hand. And then you think, well, how many people are alone in their living room right now raising their hand because their goal and their mission in life is to be on more pharmaceuticals? And the answer is really only the person who's already on so many, they're hoping for the miracle pill. No one else ever goes into it that way. So this is, clearly the path that we all want to be on is one of natural living. We all want it. The one thing that drives our country to the place that it is, being the number one consumer of pharmaceutical meds, is a moment of fear. Holy crap, what do you know? Might be dealing with that right now. So, yeah, it drives you to meds. It drives you to whatever solution you think is going to make sense. And if there's anything scientific that you think, a shred of evidence that it's going to be the best choice, you're going to jump towards it typically. So, all right, feel free to attack me now. Posts, comments, whatever you want. So this guy, I'm just going to start with his kind of introductory statement here. It's just so good. Firstly, it was wrong to claim that this virus was novel. So early on, I kind of said, novel is a questionable thing simply because it's a coronavirus. It's not like, Mars V1, right? Mars V1 would be the virus that came from Mars. It's not that. This is a coronavirus. We've seen them for years. So is it a novel version? Yeah, but what does that really mean, right? So he's saying horrible. Just don't call this novel. Secondly, it was even more wrong to claim that the population would not already have some immunity against this virus. Ooh. Which, again, something I also said early on. What do you think asymptomatic cases are? I mean, if it's an asymptomatic case, it suggests that you have the virus without infection. Last time I checked, that's some form of immunity. And it might not be antibody immunity, it might be T cell immunity. What do you know? Could be both. Thirdly, it was the crowning of stupidity to claim that someone could have COVID-19 without symptoms at all, or even pass the disease along without showing any symptoms whatsoever. Like, ooh. So now he's saying what I just said about asymptomatic? Stupid? So as we dig into this, I'll fill in as we go, but if we dig into this, the fairy tale of no immunity. So, and this is something that was really, really clear. So he starts talking about Tony Fauci. So Tony and I often sat next to each other at immunology seminars at the National Institute of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, in the U.S., because we worked in related fields back then. So for a while, I was pretty uncritical of his statement since he was a respectable colleague of mine. So I'm like, okay, cool. But then he fast forwards. That's when I realized that the entire world simply claimed that there was no immunity. But in reality, nobody had a test to prove such a statement, right? This wasn't science. This isn't science. If you're still following that idea, no immunity, that's not science, but pure speculation based on a gut feeling that was then parroted by everyone. So just kind of backing up then. So again, as we look at immunity, the idea is this. And this is why I talked early on about the spectrum of immunity and how there's someone on the planet who is the most immune to all things. Like just ridiculous. Like that person, we can't quantify, but there's a person out there. There's one person who literally takes the cake, is the top. And at the bottom, there's someone who can't produce any kind of immune response to anything. And there are a bunch of people and conditions that are in that area, but you've got a host of different cells. And so it really comes down to, like, there's probably someone who doesn't produce anything, right? No histamine, no mast cells, no antibodies, no T cells. I mean, there's nothing, right? And so that's like, okay, obviously, as you move up the spectrum to that person who can kill anything, along the way, you're going to find a bunch of people who have a very clear response to coronaviruses in general because they've been exposed to enough of them, and there's enough similarity that these people will fight them off. In mid-April, work was published by the group of Andreas Thiel, Charit Berlin, a paper with 30 authors, amongst them the virologist Christian Drosten, and it showed that in 34% of people in Berlin who had never been in contact with the SARS-CoV-2 virus, they nonetheless showed they had T-cell immunity against it. And so, T-cell immunity is different than antibody immunity. We look at antibodies or neutralizing antibodies, NAB, as a kind of early, immediate response. And that's done to help protect and prevent viral entrance, primarily into the cell. It's an early response. And so with antibody protection, you would kind of anticipate that these people would not have any type of response whatsoever, right? Like they're just going to be completely asymptomatic. And in most cases, at the antibody level, that person can't spread it. So there is no such thing as asymptomatic spread to them. You just think about this. A virus comes into you, right? So it's in your body. It's moving, trying to make its way into a place where it can now replicate, and then ends up being kind of sloughed off or shed into sputum and into mucus and into other fluids. And so then now as that is expelled, that's where you get that spread. If it can't make its way into the cells, then it can't make its way into what you produce as your bodily fluid. So that's kind of a key to understand, and that's just go look up all the research you want so you can understand immunity. So that's we're not talking about peer-reviewed journal studies. We're talking about just the basis of most classes. All right. So, let me keep going. I'll put that one down. So this means that our T cells, or white blood cells basically, detect common structures appearing on SARS-CoV-2 and regular cold viruses and therefore combat both of them. That's the Berlin study, basically saying that because of the exposure to the coronaviruses that we typically all would have. I mean, it's unlikely that anyone out here has no exposure, maybe young kids, but we know that they've already got a very rapid antibody function, and this virus tends to seem to yield the potential for very easy antibody production in young children especially, right? Those who have, they have very strong antibody titers. They're very quick. NAB is quick for them, fast response. So that's a huge thing for kids, right? You get older, you probably have antibodies, but your total antibody titer goes down, right? So your response time is way longer. Now you get way more infection relying on a T cell response, and that's of course the cytokine storm. Cytokine storm those are T cells. So just kind of give you the difference real quick between those two things. All right, so then I want to make sure you guys get this really clear too, that we're already talking about a fairy tale of asymptomatic spread, right? We're talking about that. We're talking about a fairy tale of no immunity against it. And the numbers, the data, which is what we should be looking at, not the models. We have so much data now. The data is proof of that now. So this is going to lead to someone's discussion on schools. Do we go back to school? I forget who asked me to talk about that. All right. So he talks about the failure of modelers, which again, I think it's, you guys know where I am on that. We've seen the failure of the models for sure. Immunology of common sense. That's an interesting thing. I'm not going to get into this one either because I've already kind of told you what I wanted to about this, but he calls them immunity deniers. So you've got science deniers, right? Like I'm supposedly a science denier because I don't know. I'm not too sure because I don't wear a mask. I'm a science denier. All I use again is data. I use data. And should I be publishing all of my data? I guess, but you can do it yourself. So, I've been hunting and looking to see other countries. Oh, everyone's wearing a mask now. What's the change in the rate? Show me the line change. I don't see a line change. It's on the same path. So I'm just going off of what I see, people. So, all right. But you got to look. I mean, you just look at the data. There's enough data to crunch that right now. Anything other than that, you're being pulled into crap. And then, it's like, looking at that model from Georgia Tech, it's like a model, again, of we're using data to make a model. I get it. But it's still a model. It's a model. It's not data. It's a model. Go hunt me some examples. That's why asymptomatic spread. I've been hunting for true, definitive proof of that, and all I can find are models, scientific studies, published studies of models. Not, I mean, the one scientific study that I found I thought was great. It was like followed someone around, 435 contacts, no spread. You're like, okay, so that's a great example of where that should have turned into a whole bunch of sick people. All right, so so real quick then, let's recap that. So you have antibodies that would then first respond, and then next thing you do is you've got T killer cell response. So, okay, so this is an interesting thing. What do your antibodies look like? So this is the big question. If I get exposed, or actually he talks about this. Let me see where this went through. Oh yeah, right here. Let's do this. Let's talk about the different types of tests, right? So you have a PCR test, which is basically a DNA remnant test, right? So you put a swab in, look for DNA remnant from the coronavirus, and specifically COVID-19, but maybe other coronaviruses would actually yield this positive test result. That's why they have this kind of like pretty significant issue with false positives, potentially significant issue with false negatives. And the false negative, basically, the further along someone is in killing off a virus, the more likely they'll get a PCR false negative, because they're not sloughing off that much virus anymore. DNA isn't there. And so, but now that really comes down to what their initial immunity was. So it's a really interesting story. Like you and me, we're totally different. I might test positive in the first 2 days, and then I won't test positive again maybe 6 days later, where someone else might not test positive for like 14 days. And then they might test positive for like another 20 days. And it's all over the board. That is something that we have seen through observation, right? Not fully explained anywhere yet, because we don't know that we can truly explain this by deeply digging in. Deeper introspection and study will eventually yield some of this, but it'll be really hard because we have a lot of data but not enough. Meaning I might have data on some of these people, but I might not have recorded enough about this person. I might have to go back later and see if I can find some information, or it would have been cool if I could have gotten upfront tests too. And the reason what I'm saying about this, I'm sorry, I'm leading you to a place and I'm taking my time to do it, is that just the fact that this is the story that exists is proof enough to me, but at least to all of you, it's at least proof enough that there needs to be more study along this path, proof enough to me to demonstrate that there is prior immunity. There's only one explanation that works for the varying degrees of timelines in incubation period and in infection period, and it's the varying degrees of immunity that exists out there in the world already to this virus. I would be hard-pressed to have anyone actually even write an hypothesis that makes sense and can stand up in the face of science suggesting another path for why this exists. And he talks about this too. So, again, everything that I said, he says it, but he's got better credentials. So let's go back. So he talks briefly about this. The World Health Organization talked about this. This is the global news about the Koreans. 200 Koreans who already went through COVID-19 were infected a second time. This was the early on, like, oh my gosh, you don't have immunity, you can get reinfected. There were probably no immunity against the virus. Was the outcome of the conversation, right? No immunity. Oh my gosh, they just had it and they're still not immune. So the explanation really happened, and an apology came later, and it did. It came out later. But of course, people had already run with this story, and it made its way, the sound heard around the world, that the immune Koreans were perfectly healthy and only had a short battle with the virus. The crux was that the virus debris registered with the overly sensitive test. So the PCR test is designed to be overly sensitive, right? To magnify so you can try to identify just small particulate. So what that means is you've got people sloughing off virus, a month later, and they're going to get a positive corona test. Like, well, they're just still like sloughing off virus. They've killed it off. It's just not all gone yet. And early on, that's what, people are saying, like, oh my gosh, people can get reinfected. I'm like, well, reinfected, like, let's symptom track. Because, like, what's reinfected actually mean? So if they're sloughing off viral debris, and just so you know, real quick, viral debris, dead virus, not living. The PCR test will totally capture dead virus. It doesn't have to be living to register a PCR positive. It just has to be DNA in the body. That's all it is, DNA in the mucus. As long as you can find it, test positive. You don't find it, test negative. Left side, right side, it's not systemic. How is it not systemic? Prior immunity. In all things, your immune system tries to quarantine, just like we quarantine. Your immune system quarantines, moves an infection to a lymph node, keeps it at bay. In some cases, it'll create cysts around certain infections, right? Your body has this potential to trap and contain and battle. So prior immunity would do that. No immunity wouldn't do that. Okay, so basically the whole point of this with the Koreans is that they were still sloughing off virus. It wasn't infection healed reinfection. It was literally just continually sloughing off virus. because they never got sick again, right? So the World Health Organization came out and said, well, they never actually had symptoms again. So we pretty much explain this with